and welcome to Friday. It's the 8th of May. It's a Friday. The sun is shining, certainly out the window that I'm looking towards at the moment. So I hope this finds everybody who's tuning in well and safe, and smiling this morning. Okay, so for those of you who haven't met me before or don't know me, my name is Bronwyn Pearson. I'm from Pinnacle People Solutions, and welcome to our daily Facebook Live update. So we've been doing this now for 8 weeks yesterday, and our intention is to we've been live at 9:15 every weekday for the last 8 weeks, with the view to provide updates on new information and more detailed information about topics relating to staffing and business management. So making sense of all of the regulations and changes and all of the things that are happening and unfolding in relationship to the pandemic and businesses and their capacity to operate and how they're going to continue to do business over time, etc. So our company, Pinnacle People Solutions, provides human resource services, solutions, strategy, support 24/7 to regionally based business, small to medium enterprises and not-for-profit organisations that are regionally based. We are here to help you through and your business through these really challenging COVID-19 times. So please ask any questions. Good morning to everybody that's joining us this morning. Lovely to see you, as always. Please ask any questions you may have as we go along, and I will do my best to answer those. Outside of this, obviously, you can contact us, our team, or myself, our wonderful team, anytime via Facebook. You can contact us by private or direct message, email, telephone. My team, I'm sure, in a moment are going to put those contact details up in the chat screen for you so that you've got ready access to those. Also, these live streams are being recorded and they are available, the history of them, up on our Facebook page, but also on our YouTube channel and in LinkedIn. So we want to make sure that the information is accessible to as many people as possible. And thank you, team. I've seen they've just put up our contact details there for you. So make sure that you get in touch with us and ask us any questions that you might have. So first of all, as we do every morning, we will go through any breaking news or big changes since yesterday. And there's a couple of things that I think we need to be mindful of. The most interesting and impactful stuff is likely to be tomorrow morning, and I'll actually be delivering a special Saturday morning broadcast at 9:15 in the morning, because the National Cabinet meets again today and the Prime Minister is due to deliver information about what's come out of that. We're expecting some a national framework potentially around the easing of restrictions, and obviously that will be up to each state and territory as to how they go about implementing that, timing, strategies, those sorts of things. But we expect to hear more from the Prime Minister later today, and so I will be doing a special Facebook live stream in the morning on that. But we have had a few things of note that I need you to be aware of, given that it is now Friday, the 8th of May. That means for any of you employers out there who believe that you may be JobKeeper eligible and that you have JobKeeper eligible staff, you need to pay each and every one of those JobKeeper eligible staff a minimum of $1,500 by today, Friday the 8th of May, in order to be eligible for JobKeeper for the first 2 fortnights of the scheme, that being the 30th of April to the 30th of March to the 12th of April and the 13th of April to the 26th of April. So you must pay that minimum JobKeeper wage subsidy of $1,500 a fortnight before tax to all of your eligible staff by today, the 8th of May. So get in touch with us if you've got any questions or queries about that, and we can certainly help you with that. The Job Keeper Enrollment, so the capacity for businesses to enrol in JobKeeper has been extended to the 31st of May. However, having said that, if you have eligible staff for JobKeeper in those first 2 fortnight periods, 30th of March to the 12th of April, 13th of April to the 26th of April, you must make sure that you have paid them a minimum of $1,500 a fortnight before tax by today for those periods in order to be eligible. So any staff that might be eligible for JobKeeper that nominally earn less than $1,500 a fortnight or might be on unpaid leave but eligible, you need to make sure that you've paid them that minimum less tax for those 2 fortnights by today, close of business today. Okay, so earlier this week, we had the Prime Minister foreshadow that businesses are going to have to change the way that they operate if they want to either reopen or, for some businesses, continue to operate. And he has flagged that some restrictions could be lifted after the National Cabinet meeting today, and that's the national framework I was talking to you about that we expect to hear more about later today from the Prime Minister, and that I will be doing the special live stream tomorrow morning in respect of. Earlier this week, the National Cabinet decided that Safe Work Australia would be the single source of information for employers on safety rules. But we're yet to see specific decisions in respect of health and safety beyond the 10 principles that were announced about 3 weeks ago by National Cabinet. We're waiting to see the more specific details on health and safety obligations relative to the easing of restrictions. And we expect to hear more about that from the Prime Minister this afternoon, which again I'll cover in the live stream tomorrow morning. We do know that the unions are seeking 3 particular changes to do with the obligations on employers, benefits for staff, and so forth to do with the potential easing of restrictions. And they want 3 changes. 1, paid pandemic leave for all workers. Now, you might remember that we covered a number of weeks ago changes to the modern awards to introduce unpaid pandemic leave. But there is now a push by the unions for paid pandemic leave for all workers. They also want all employers to be under a legal obligation to protect their staff from coronavirus by using measures like social distancing and other requirements. And they also want a specific duty on companies to tell regulators about coronavirus cases amongst their staff. So that's what the unions are seeking. We will know more this afternoon about what is actually going to be put in place. On Tuesday this week, the Prime Minister announced that a planning toolkit is and has since been made available on the Safe Work Australia website to help businesses navigate complicated work health and safety laws as their employees return to work. So protocols in respect of cleaning, social distancing, personal protective equipment, hygiene, etc., are all covered in these toolkits, and the toolkits are industry and profession specific. So you can go up onto the Safe Work website and put in the details of your industry, and it will provide you with specific information. The government has actually, in deciding at National Cabinet that Safe Work Australia would be the preeminent source of information, the government has rebuilt that website to provide all of this information to business for helping them to get back to work. And I'm sure that that our staff are going to put the Safe Work Australia website details. There it is. Goodness me, they're psychic. It's wonderful. Will be going up. We've been watching this space in terms of health and safety. We've certainly put it on our topic agenda for next week, for a couple of days next week, to talk about what the unfolding health and safety obligations are for businesses during this time, and how what you need to know, what you need to do, and also, of course, we can help you with any and all of those things. So we do expect, as I said, to hear specific information further from the Prime Minister this afternoon on what the National Cabinet have agreed to regarding potential easing of restrictions and the framework around that. Obviously, it will still be up to individual states and territories to put that framework into effect in whatever timetable and so forth that they determine is appropriate for their particular area, and that will be the subject of tomorrow morning's special Saturday live stream. So a bit of an update, general update from yesterday. Our New South Wales Premier has said that restrictions will not be eased before Mother's Day, even if the National Cabinet changes the guidelines today, and we will know more about that, and I'll be discussing it in the morning. The New South Wales Premier has said that mothers can see multiple visitors on Sunday, but only 2 adult visitors at a time. And you still need to be really mindful of exposing potentially immunocompromised or older people to the potential for infection and so forth, and maintain social distancing. We've had a record number of tests undertaken in New South Wales. There's only 3 new cases at this stage. The state total is 3,045. All new cases are from known contacts, so we've been able to trace those as a state. Get tested if you live or work in the areas of Blacktown, Canada Bay, Cumberland, Inner West, Liverpool, Parramatta and Penrith local government areas. Get tested if you have even the mildest of symptoms. They are known hotspots. So, right, that's our update from the last 24 hours. So last Thursday, I started to talk with you about the Job Keeper Enabling Directions, and have done this a couple of times now on specific elements of those enabling directions. And today we're going to have a look at some case studies on changing duties under the Job Keeper Enabling Directions. So to support the implementation and operation of the JobKeeper scheme, temporary provisions have been added to the Fair Work Act, which are known otherwise as the JobKeeper provisions, and they apply to employers who have qualified for the JobKeeper scheme and to their eligible employees. So only those staff that are JobKeeper eligible within an eligible employee can be given JobKeeper enabling directions. So the Fair Work Act JobKeeper provisions, so these are the additional provisions that have been added to the Fair Work Act on the 9th of April to give effect to JobKeeper provisions, enable qualifying employers to, in certain circumstances, to give a direction to change an employee's usual duties, to change their location of work, and to agree with them regarding regarding changes to their days and time of work. So a qualifying employer can give such a direction, a JobKeeper enabling direction as it's known, or make an agreement under the Fair Work JobKeeper provisions from the 9th of April, because that was the date that the changes came in, and the provisions will end on the 28th of September, which is when the JobKeeper program will be concluding. So the provisions enabling directions that you can give as a qualifying employer to any of your JobKeeper eligible staff, you can only give between the 9th of April and the 28th of April, although you can't give a JobKeeper enabling direction retrospectively. So we need to be really mindful of that. Okay, so essentially, if in order to qualify or in order to be able to give JobKeeper enabling directions, you actually need, as an employer, to have qualified for and enrolled in the JobKeeper scheme. Now, your enrolment possibility has been extended to the 31st of May, but as I said earlier, you have a responsibility for any eligible staff for those first 2 pay periods of the JobKeeper scheme, that being the 30th of March to the 12th of April and the 13th of April to the 26th of April, to have paid those eligible staff a minimum of $1,500 a fortnight before tax by today for those periods, in order to confirm your eligibility. You also need to be entitled to JobKeeper payments for the employees to whom you plan to give a JobKeeper enabling direction. And you need to be a national system employer in the Fair Work system. So your employees need to be covered by the federal National Employment Relations System. So the Fair Work Act, National Employment Standards, etc. Okay, so the Fair Work Act, as I said, JobKeeper provisions allow qualifying employers to give directions to eligible employees in certain circumstances, and these are the JobKeeper enabling directions. If an employer gives you as an employee a JobKeeper enabling direction, then you are required to comply with it as a staff member. That's important for both employers and employees to know. So let's talk, as we've slated to do today, about directions to change usual duties. So the question we've been asked many times now is, when can I make a direction to change someone's usual duties, assuming they're an eligible JobKeeper staff member? Under the Fair Work Act JobKeeper provisions, and these were the ones that were introduced into the Fair Work Act on the 9th of April, a qualifying employer can give somebody who is eligible to receive JobKeeper an enabling direction to perform duties that are within their skill and competency. And you can give that direction for a relevant staff member who is JobKeeper eligible to perform any duties that are within their skill and competency, provided that those duties are safe. So considering the nature and spread of coronavirus in particular, but those duties need to be safe for the person to undertake. You need to make sure that the staff member you're giving these alternate duties to has any required licenses or qualifications to perform the duties, as well as relevant experience. If perhaps licenses or qualifications might not be necessary, it's certainly got to be within the scope of the employee's capacity to actually undertake those duties. And the duties need to be reasonable within the scope of your normal business operations. So we've had cases, for example, where staff have shifted from providing table service in a restaurant to delivery and takeaway duties, from preparation of orders, assisting the kitchen, those sorts of things. So that would be an instance where it would most likely be reasonable. You may not be able to ask someone to undertake certain duties in the kitchen if it required safe food handling certificates and those sorts of things, unless perhaps they already have them. You certainly wouldn't be able to ask anybody to do anything that might require a certificate 3 or 4, so somebody's qualified as a cook or a chef. But certainly modifying duties within the scope of a business's operations, like a restaurant, for example, could well be entirely appropriate and reasonable. And the direction won't apply to an employee unless the employer reasonably believes that the direction about duties is necessary to continue the employment of one or more staff. So we've had a number of cases in hospitality and retail where employers have given their employees a JobKeeper enabling direction to change their duties within the scope of their normal business operations, and which is reasonable because otherwise they wouldn't have had or been able to maintain any gainful employment on behalf of one or more of their staff. And that's the caveat. To determine whether it's necessary, it doesn't matter that the employer could have given a similar direction to another staff member. So you've still got the flexibility as an employer to choose who you need to ask to be flexible and change their duties. You need, however, as an employer, to make sure that the direction is reasonable. You need to take into account all of the circumstances, including any caring responsibilities that your staff may have that you want to give a direction to. If a direction is ultimately unreasonable, then it won't apply to the staff member. And look, in these instances where you're looking potentially to give a JobKeeper enabling direction of any sort, including changing duties or location of somebody's work, we would advise you to get advice. We've actually already seen a couple of instances where a business has gone ahead, an employer has gone ahead and given a JobKeeper enabling direction that has not been reasonable. And fortunately, they rang to get a second opinion before they implemented it, and we were able to advise them very quickly that they can't do X, which is what they were planning to do, but they could do Y because that would be reasonable. And they were able to pivot quickly. Make no mistake, there is a lot of attention being paid at the moment now that we're in the implementation phase of JobKeeper. There is a lot of attention being paid to how employers are implementing the JobKeeper provisions, and there will be a desire to make an example of employers that don't do the right thing, whether that was intentional or otherwise. So my advice to you would be to get advice on any directions that you may want to give under JobKeeper. You can only direct a staff member to do work that applies to the operation of your business that they are employed at. So if you've got an overarching employment sort of entity that employs staff that you have employed in different businesses, let me make it really clear that you can only direct a staff member to do work that applies to the operation of the business that they're employed at. So you can't get them to do odd jobs that are not related to the operation of the business, just to be really clear about that. You also can't reduce that employee's base rate of pay with a direction to change usual duties or while that direction is in place. If the temporary new duties attract a higher base rate, for example, under an applicable award or an enterprise agreement, then you need to pay that staff member the higher rate. If the duties that you've asked them to do would ordinarily attract a lower base rate, you can't shift their normal base rate. So just to be really clear about the pay implications for this as well. So let's look at a case study example. We've got a staff member who is employed in a regionally based manufacturing business. Normally, he would be a leading hand. The manufacturing business has been significantly affected by coronavirus. They've enrolled in the JobKeeper scheme and they expect to receive JobKeeper payments for this particular staff member who they've deemed to be an eligible staff member under JobKeeper. Given the downturn that this manufacturing business has encountered, this particular employer doesn't need this staff member to do his normal leading hand duties. In fact, what they want him to be able to do is to actually do some stock management and forklift driving duties temporarily. Now, in this particular instance, the business wasn't able to give this JobKeeper enabling direction to this particular staff member because this particular staff member had experience driving forklifts but didn't have the appropriate forklift license. So the company would not be able to give a lawful JobKeeper enabling direction to this person, even though they've had experience, and you might question how they've had experience but not got a license, but they couldn't do that because the person didn't have the appropriate license. Even though the driving duties are safe and can be performed with appropriate social distancing measures in place, and those kind of duties are within the scope of the manufacturing company's business. So they spoke with us, and what they ended up doing was giving that enabling direction to another staff member. And they're actually also going to go halves with the previous staff member in him getting his forklift license, so that they can actually make, have him doing some meaningful duties, and he gets to get a license out of it. So that's good. So while the JobKeeper enabling direction is in place for the second staff member that they chose to do this with, that person's employment conditions, such as their hours and days of work, haven't changed. So in the instance of both, of not the second person, they will actually get paid more for this particular work than their normal work. But in the case of the staff member who was doing leading hand duties, as soon as he gets his forklift license and they issue that enabling direction, then he will actually still get his normal pay, which would be his leading hand pay, because it's more than he would normally get driving a forklift and doing store management, stores operations. Okay, so Given that as a case study, so the intention was a good one. All of the criteria was met, except for the fact that the person that they wanted to do the duties didn't have a current forklift license. They've chosen another person. They have to pay them more because their normal salary wouldn't be as much as they would get to do these new duties. So they have to pay that person more. In the case of the first person, they still need support in that area, so they're going to go halves with him on getting his forklift license, and then they'll be able to give the enabling direction, assuming it's before the 28th of September, which is when JobKeeper finishes. So how do you, the other question we had from this employer and we've had from others is, how do I make a direction to change usual duties? So what do I actually got to do? And this part's really important as well, because giving the direction and actually formalising it are two very different things, and both are required in terms of the changes to the legislation. So you need to notify a staff member, and this is what we told this organisation. You need to notify them in writing at least 3 days before giving the JobKeeper enabling direction, unless the person agrees to a shorter time frame. And in this company's situation, the second staff member that they approached, because the first one didn't have their forklift license, was happy to undertake that work the following day. So they, in writing, agreed to a shorter time frame than the 3 days notice. And they kept a record, the company kept a record at our instruction of their consultation with the staff member about the direction, and they kept a written record of that consultation. They also kept written records of the consultation with the leading hand, who they will ultimately issue this direction to once he's got his license. And they also made that direction in writing. So 3 pieces of in writing communication was required to give effect to this JobKeeper enabling direction to change duties. One is they needed to notify the staff in writing 3 days ahead. Fortunately, staff member number 2 agreed to do it from the following day and agreed to that in writing. So actually there's 4 pieces. So that was the second piece of documentation in writing. The third one was that they had to demonstrate that they had consulted with both of those staff that they intended to give a JobKeeper enabling direction to, and that had to be in writing. And fourth, they had to give the second staff member the direction in writing per se. So there was 4 pieces of documentation required to bring that about. Look, in some cases, it might be possible without using the JobKeeper enabling directions for an employer to change someone's duties in accordance with an applicable award, an enterprise agreement, or an employment contract. You might remember a couple of days ago, might have been Monday actually, I think I might have done or Wednesday, did the employment contracts and position descriptions presentation, why bother with them? This is where employment contracts become very, very important. Because if you've got an employment contract in place with your staff member and it says we can change your duties, then you can actually do that. Some changes have also happened, which I've covered off previously, to awards to provide flexibility during the coronavirus pandemic for employers to make temporary directions. So that's whether or not they're JobKeeper enabled. But talk to us before you do that, because we need to make sure that you've met all of your obligations either under the award, an enterprise agreement, the employment contract, or a JobKeeper enabling direction to change duties. Okay, the other thing that I will just touch on, which is kind of related, although they're separate things, changing duties is one thing, changing location of work is another, but I thought it might be helpful for us to just add that on to the end of today. You can, if you're an eligible JobKeeper and eligible employer, and you have JobKeeper eligible staff, you can give an eligible employee a JobKeeper enabling direction to perform duties at a place that is different from the employee's normal place of work. And this can include the employee's home. But you need to make sure before you do that the location is suitable for the staff member to do their duties. It's safe for the person to perform their duties at the new location, considering particularly, of course, the nature and spread of coronavirus, and that the employee performing their duties at the new location is reasonably within the scope of your normal business operations. So let me take my company as an example. So we made the decision much earlier than was required by regulation to move out of our offices in town temporarily and to work remotely from each of our homes. To do that, I talked to the staff about my concerns about health and safety, about us continuing to operate. We all agreed to do that, and each staff member undertook a self-assessment process at home for their home location. They took photos of where they were going to be working and their setup. They sent that to me. I needed to make sure as the business owner that they were working in a safe and appropriate location. We've continued to have those conversations as time has gone on, and it looks like we will be eligible for JobKeeper. And so what I will then be doing is giving a JobKeeper enabling direction to my staff about them continuing to work at their home location until further notice. And that is, we might know more late this afternoon with the Prime Minister's announcements about easing of restrictions potentially, and I'll be talking more about that tomorrow morning. And that will impact my business too. Like if there's a possibility of us being able to safely go back to our office spaces at some point, then we will have to plan that transition. I will do so in full consultation with our team, and we will have the appropriate documentation in place to do that. In the meantime, before we can go back there, I will be giving them a JobKeeper enabling direction about them continuing to work from their home locations. And we'll obviously continue to monitor and talk about that as time goes on. So that kind of JobKeeper enabling direction to change location won't apply to a staff member unless the employer reasonably believes that the direction about location of work is necessary to continue the employment of one or more employees. And to determine whether it's necessary, it doesn't matter that you as an employer could have given a similar direction to another staff member, just to be really clear. Again, the reasonableness test applies. So you need to make sure that the direction you're giving any of your staff in terms of change of duties or change in location is reasonable, that it takes account of all of the employees' circumstances, including any carer responsibilities. And that was certainly something that we needed to discuss, myself and a couple of members of my team who have caring responsibilities for children at home who are being homeschooled, given the other changes to the school environment. So we needed to talk about that. How are we going to balance that? We stay in regular communication about how that's working, so that I can make sure that the staff are safe and healthy in their location of work, and so that they can feel that they can raise and talk to me about any issues. So it needs to be reasonable. If it's not reasonable, it won't apply. Again, for giving a change to a location of work, it's very similar to giving a change to duties. And that is, you need to notify the staff member at least 3 days before giving the JobKeeper enabling direction. You need to consult with them and keep a record of the consultation, and you need to give the JobKeeper enabling direction in writing. Again, 3 or 4 pieces of written documentation that you need to have on file and be able to provide in the event that the Fair Work Ombudsman or the Fair Work Commission asks you for it. And you need to make sure that that if you're not eligible for JobKeeper, there are still flexibilities you may be able to access to direct staff to work from a different location without issuing a JobKeeper enabling direction, which I've described in our situation had already happened prior to JobKeeper. However, the direction needs to be lawful and it needs to be reasonable. Okay, so the Fair Work Ombudsman will be able to enforce and can enforce a number of the provisions relating to the JobKeeper scheme. That are about ensuring minimum wages and conditions and dealing with any issues of misuse of the JobKeeper enabling directions by employers. They can also enforce general protections relating to the new provisions. So the right to refuse or exercise a workplace right. So you need to be really careful in implementing these changes get advice, please. Because, you know, I fully respect and appreciate that so many businesses are under the pump right now, and you're having to pivot and change and close and partially reopen, and all sorts of things are going on. You don't want the risk of having inadvertently got yourself in hot water with the Fair Work Ombudsman either, or health and safety legislation. So please talk to us before you do anything. The other thing I would also just remind you about while we're talking about JobKeeper Enabling Directions is that any such enabling direction or agreement cannot reduce minimum pay rates under the Fair Work Act, and any terms and conditions not related to the direction or agreement will continue. So you need to make sure that you do that too, and obviously talk to us if you've got any queries. What I would say to you in terms of the practical realities of JobKeeper Enabling Directions, particularly for changing duties or location, which is what we're talking about today, is to make sure you have employment contracts, position descriptions, and good policy and procedure in place, and follow the steps. Make sure that entitlements and obligations are crystal clear to your staff, and those means are the perfect way of making sure that that's the case. Establish clear expectations, communicate frequently and often with your staff, particularly through this period. And if you're unsure, don't hesitate to ask us. Seriously, we are here, available 24/7, very happy to help. We can make sure that you meet your employment obligations in the same way that you have a tax accountant to make sure that you're meeting your company's tax obligations. That is pretty much it today in respect of a bit of a case study on changing duties and location. Thank you so much for joining us. I don't think I can see in here that we've had any questions that have come in, but of course, don't hesitate to ask them. You've got our contact details. We'd be delighted to hear from you. I'll answer them tomorrow morning at the special Saturday live stream, and I'll also answer them again on Monday morning when we're back. Thank you for joining us again today. We really appreciate it. We hope this has been helpful for our audience. We're getting feedback to suggest that it is, but if there's topics or areas that you'd love us to cover which we haven't yet, or which we might have done before, and you really want a refresher or an update, let us know. We'd be very happy to do that. Our aim is to make sure that our regional communities, that we can help as much as we can to sustain and grow those communities through this really challenging time. So we want to help. So let us know how we can do that. If you have specific questions about your particular business, or you need us to help you, contact us using the contact information that our team has put up in the chat screen. I mentioned at the outset of the session today that I will be doing a special Saturday live stream tomorrow morning at 9:15 to explain the consequences for businesses and for employees about the PM's announcements for after the National Cabinet meeting this afternoon. So we expect to hear about a national framework for easing restrictions and more details about employers' health and safety obligations as those restrictions are eased and more workplaces are gradually opened. So please join us tomorrow morning for that special live stream. Invite your colleagues and your friends. In the meantime, until I see you again, please hug the people that you can. Wave cheerily at those that you can't currently. Stay safe, stay home, wash your hands, and we will look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Thanks so much for joining us.